Thank you so much for taking the time. And Kim, this podcast is mainly for logistics professionals, trade compliance folks, importers, exporters. So we look at everything that runs global trade, and folks like you play a big part in helping things being moved from A to B. I wanted to actually spend quite a bit of time in just understanding that end to end and as granularly as possible so that our audience can understand the complexity, the kind of care you guys have to take, the various laws that you have to be mindful of. And when things do not go your way or do not go the right way, like how do you figure out ways to fix it? So maybe we can start with that. Tell us, like, what does it really take to move something from A to B? And you do this for small companies to big, so I'm sure you've seen like all everything that there is to see, right? So handing it over to you to just walk us through that entire journey.
Sure. So a typical shipment starts with a supplier. Though an order is created from a buyer, they have it ready to go, and so usually that buyer will reach out to a logistics company and ask them to get the ball rolling to find out what the cost is going to be to move the shipment, how big is the shipment, and then get it onto. Typically I work with ocean shipments, but sometimes there's also air shipments that getting it onto whichever vessel is required, and then moving it to the country that is going to, and then from there, and there's a lot of little minutia that happens within that. I'm not going to bore anybody with because that's going to get really technical. But from getting it onto a vessel, a boat or a aircraft, and then moving it to the country of destination, then there's a customs process. Almost all countries that I'm aware of have a customs process of some sort. So this logs the shipment into commerce, into a foreign trade zone in that country, and then so paperwork has to be taken care of. So all of this stuff is all the digital data, at least as far as the United States is concerned, is captured, and then that information is kept up with by a lot of different government agencies, and then the movement of the goods happens in country. So this could be usually by a truck, moves it to the destination of choice. So this could be a warehouse or it could be somebody's front lawn. Just depends. So that is the full process.
Got it. So at a high level, that sounds straightforward, but I'm sure there's lots of nuances over there. You did mention at the beginning that a buyer gets in touch with the logistics company. So in this case, it's an importer who has purchased something from a company outside of their country. But does it also happen the other way around where there's an exporter or a seller who needs to send something over? I'm sure that also happens.
Yes, so there's a lot of bidirectional trade that happens around the world, and it depends on what's called Incoterms. So these terms are basically putting responsibility on a party, right? So you have a party to the transaction. So you might have the party to the transaction being the seller. So the seller's Incoterms could be what's called X works or EXW. Again, this is that minutia part. EXW is the importer. So it depends on the term. So the terms are a party has to do something. So if it's X works, typically the terms are that the party who is buying is required under X works to coordinate from the seller all the way to their door. Right. So this would be moving it or submitting a request to a logistics agent and having it moved. There's also FCA, which is basically it's picked up at the door, but the seller is responsible for getting it picked up at the door, but the buyer is responsible for the export paperwork of it and then moving it all the way to them. Then you have FOB, where the seller is responsible for getting it from their factory to the port, including the export fees, but then the buyer's responsible for getting it from the port to them. And then you have CIF, or CFR, which kind of work the same, but one has insurance, one doesn't. And so it moves it from the seller is responsible for moving it from their door to the port of destination. And then the buyer has to take it from the port of destination to their door and pay all the duties of the import. Then you have DAP. So this is where the seller is responsible for getting the goods from their place all the way to the door of the buyer, but they don't take care of the duties, right? So they don't take care of any of the import processing, typically not even the importer security filing. So that this buyer has to do all that, but the logistics of it is done by the seller. And then you have what's called DDP, or delivered duty at place, or I'm sorry, delivered duties paid. And that is where the seller is responsible for the entire kit and caboodle. And so this is where you saw a lot of the de minimis issues arise, is that a lot of these very small parcel sellers, so think your Temu or your Shein or any of these small parcel sellers, they were dependent on DDP, delivered duties paid, and they would send those goods directly to the buyer, and then the buyer would say, okay, I have my dog who's trying to whiskey, go lay down. The buyer would not have to worry about anything. It would just be, basically like it was mailed to them, right? So there's, again, it's that minutia of it. So you have to really get into, if you want to know more, just go to incoterms.org, I think, Google, and it'll show you what every part of it is. There are charts and graphics that you can see that will display it and explain it to you pictorially, and basically tell you who is responsible for which part of the trip based on the Incoterms that are agreed to on the sale. I hope all that
Got
makes
it.
sense.
No, that's amazing. I love getting into the details. And also, the other thing that I noticed is there's no shortage of abbreviations, is there? It's like
Yeah.
full of abbreviations.
Yeah, we live in what's called alphabet soup. As a kid, the cereal, and now I kind of regret that.
Thanks for pointing us to that resource. I think pictorially it would make a lot of sense, right? Like, where's the boundary of liability really,
Yeah, if you
shifting
pull up
between
on
hands?
a search, you will find Incoterms, like all these graphics on what it means
Hmm.
pictorially and who's responsible for
Yeah,
what, and it's these lines. So yeah, if you ever like looked it up, it's very one page informative as a picture.
yeah, yeah. That's great. Now, this contract is between the buyer and the seller. The Incoterms
Yes,
piece is between the
yes,
buyer and the seller.
yes.
But who really ensures that the contract is being followed?
That is usually the buyer or the seller, right? So if the buyer is like, "Hey, we agreed to deliver duties paid,"
Mm,
then the buyer is expecting the seller to do all that work, right? All the logistics, coordination. But if they wanted to save some money on the cost, because, there's always going to be some service fees and everything when you request DDP, they may have said X Works. So, hey, X Works is cheaper, we'll do that, not realizing the costs of the freight and the customs and the services involved. So,
got it, got it. And this piece of information is super valuable to someone like you. And how are you informed of what is the Incoterm for a given shipment? Like, what's a piece of documentation that is handed over to you that you can scan and understand? Okay, what's going on?
so usually it's my client will tell me. So I have very few clients that actually use our sister freight company. We don't really focus on freight. We focus more on the customs and the compliance. But for when I do handle freight, usually they just tell me, hey, this is X Works from Taiwan, or this is, or FCA from Taiwan, which is typically what they use, or it's FOB from China, Shanghai. So they'll tell me, I'll inform the agent that I work with saying, hey, we've got an FOB shipment out of Shanghai. Here's the supplier information. Please get us a cost estimate. We don't, a long time ago, I learned that people expect quotes to be hard and fast, and you have to stick to the quote.
Hmm.
There's no such thing in freight. We call it a cost estimate because that's what it is.
Yeah, yeah. Now, since you're more into the compliance side of things, wanted to dig deep into that as well. So let's say that you are an exporter from the US and I'm the importer sitting in India. And let's just take an example. Is there a specific industry or product type that you generally work with, or can I pick anything for this example?
So I don't do a lot with exports out of the United States. I have a lot
Uh,
of friends who do, but
Okay.
I used to. I
Okay.
used to before certain people got into certain houses and started making life a little more difficult on the import
Yeah.
side. The export side of it has its own just
Mm.
its own world of compliance. So
Yeah.
rather it's ensuring your end user is, the right person who's supposed to be the end user, or it's the product itself is the product, controlled, right? So is it a
Yeah.
controlled product? Like, for example, most people don't know this, but iPhones, laptops, these things that we have in our homes are controlled products. You can't just send them out willy nilly. And people have gone to jail not knowing that. I mean, literally
Mm.
in prison right now. I saw a story on it. It was very sad where a woman didn't know that sending laptops to China was illegal.
Mm.
Like, there's nothing that really, like, unless you grow up in this or this is your job, you don't really
Yeah.
know this part of it, right? So the layman doesn't know. Your
Mm.
typical software engineer would not know this without having exposure to it, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we say, we really, really, really stress if you're engaged in international trade, work with a professional. It doesn't have to be an attorney. I am not an attorney.
Mhm.
I say it depends a lot, but I am not an attorney. I do work with many attorneys, and what they do is they do compliance reviews and checks and making sure that that person is not going to find themselves in trouble with the government
Yeah.
later because
Yeah.
they didn't know sending an iPhone to their friend in, Bangladesh was, not allowed, so they
Yeah.
just don't know
Yeah. Yeah.
or into China like that. And that's the thing, like, I don't know all the new export laws that have come about because again, that's not where I focus, but there's OFAC that you have to look at, BIS you have to look at, you've got to check the ECCN list, see if it's on there. Most things coming out of the United States, your consumer products going to India, most things are what's called EAR 99. It's a generic code. It's something that is inconsequential, right? So think your pens or I have a keyboard thing that I use for padding. Like those kinds of things, your typical consumer items, typically fine, but there are still plenty of things that, have in our homes that we don't know. Cameras, drones, that
Yeah.
if we send it to India without the proper license can get you in a lot of trouble with the government.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
say work with a
Got it.
professional.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's flip it, right? So let me be the exporter from India and you are the importer in the US. Shall we take the example of, I don't know, uh, something like jackfruit, which is very common in India, like a fruit
Sure.
which needs to be exported from India and imported into the US. So you as the buyer of that shipment, because you would then use that jackfruit and convert it into some tin containers and sell it as,
Uh-huh.
processed jackfruit. Let's just say that. So what would it take for you and what should be the interaction between the two of us as importer and
Mhm.
exporter?
Okay, so I'm assuming that because we don't have it here, jackfruit is an actual agricultural product.
Yes. Yes.
So the thing about a customs broker's mind is we start going to all the partner government agencies that we have to use in order to import any good, and they keep cropping up. Today, there's a new one that the agency may have been around for a long time, but the requirements are new, right? So, like with jackfruit, for example, that is what we would call a perishable item. It's also a fruit. So we have to go into APHIS to make sure, which is the USDA's website that shows us that it's allowed to be imported, and it'll show us if it's a license is required, right? So and we also have to see if there's a quota. Like for example, sugar has a quota. You can only import so much sugar per year, depending on the time of year. There's beef has a quota as well. So and where it comes from, that can have a quota as well. So that would be something that the importer would need to work with their either their customs broker or their trade attorney and say, hey, I want to import jackfruit from India for my store in New York. How do I go about doing that? And if they talk to a professional before they start, it's going to be a lot better experience than if they try to pull the professional in after it's already arrived in port. And this is because there's FDA prior notice. So you need to make sure that you're informing I don't know if it applies to jackfruit. I would have to look that up. But, there's APHIS to make sure that you can import it. You would have to let your broker know that they need to file the USDA form with APHIS. There's also like making sure that there's no bugs or little stragglers that like to get on these containers. So agriculture will look at containers for potential, stowaways that like like to hide in things. They want to make sure that there's fumigation where possible. If fumigation is not possible, then there's another method that you would have to go through, especially if it's considered organic. Is it organic? We would have to actually file an organic form. There's a lot with agriculture that's that's a customs broker's nightmare unless that's what they're really focused on. Flowers is another one. So you have to make sure that everything is there. So if you're the importer and you're working with the exporter, you've got to work with the exporter to say, hey, when you're, are you loading this stuff in a cleaner facility, right? I don't
Mm.
mean clean facility like, what would be required for medical or anything like that, or laboratories. I mean, just you're not going to have a gust of wind throw on a noxious weed onto your container, which yes, I have had that happen before, and it wasn't even an agriculture product. You're not going to have a stink bug get into your container, which yes, I've had that happen before. Also, it was an agriculture product, but it was exempt from agricultural claims. So it's just there's a lot.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's really asking that exporter what their loading process looks
yeah,
like
yeah.
and making sure that there's not going to be a straggler that gets on that container. Then from there, if it has to be fumigated or can be fumigated, it would have to go through a fumigation process in the origin country. And then from there, it would have to be offloaded here. They would check for that fumigation certificate, which has to be provided also by the exporter. If you're talking about any kind of meat products, those require veterinary certificates. So, those we have to get those from the exporter before it leaves. Don't try to do it after because you can't get them after and the product ends up getting destroyed. So yeah, there's a lot.
No, that's like sounds like a crash course. I mean, you went through so many. It feels like you have this checklist all in your head, and you know which one to apply and which paths to go down.
Yeah.
Comes with
Yeah.
experience, I
I,
suppose.
I swim through all of this like the river Styx, I tell you.
So that's amazing how you were able to just quickly knock that out. So it does feel like the exporter also in that way needs to follow a lot of the rules and regulations imposed by the US government. Just because the exporter is in India, it doesn't mean you can just put it in anything and send it across. It is going to get impacted when it reaches the US, and my buyer or my customer is not going to have a good experience. So the incentive for me as the seller is to follow these things so that when the buyer receives it, it's all smooth sailing for them.
Yes, and you have to be really careful about it too. So for example, a couple of years ago, I had a shipment of tea. First time I've been working with this client for over a decade. First time they decide to send organic tea. And I'm like, okay, now I got to fill out the organic side because you have organics on your list. And is it organic? Does it
Yeah.
have to be? I'm like, does it say organic on your packaging? Yes. I'm like, then yes. If packaging says organic, then we
Yeah.
have to claim organics.
Yeah.
And it turned out there was some problem with the exporter that just didn't have the organic certificate yet. It was an organic farm, but it wasn't recertified yet. So it was right between certifications. And so we were like, can't do anything with this until we have that. We can either destroy it, send it back, or you just have to pay storage. And they paid a lot in storage until we got that document. And
Yeah.
so that was, it was really, really important that yes, working with, I tell everybody all the time, I know that business tends to be very tight-lipped about how their operations go, and I get it, but you can't afford that in trade. In
Yeah.
trade, you have to be very transparent with your buyer and your seller. The two export-import companies work hand in hand. Your
Mm.
export is my import. And so it is your product as much as it is mine. And just because it's not in your hands anymore doesn't mean it's not yours.
Yeah.
So, we're like, if you want to have repeat sales, be very transparent. If you want to make sure that you have, a good experience on both sides, make sure you're following the rules of export from your country as well as import from my country. Because if you don't, it can cost the buyer thousands of dollars in storage fees, right? Because you're waiting on a piece of paper that says something
Yeah.
we already knew, right?
Yeah. Well,
Veterinarian certificates, for example, we had one client years ago who was bringing in a seasoned potato chip, but the seasoning said beef flavor. It wasn't actually beef at all. There was no beef in it. None. But because it said beef flavor on it, customs thought that they had used beef bouillon, which is made from beef. And they was like, I need a list of your ingredients. It's on, and I'm like, and how like percentages, volume, everything. And they're like, we don't disclose that. I'm like, you have to. This is customs. They're not going to make it for you. They're not going to try to corner your market. You have to provide it. So they provided. It was just like a mix of peppers, is all it was.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
created this flavor. And so we got it through and everything when we explained we don't need a veterinarian certificate because there's no meat on this at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like I said, it's very important to be transparent, very, very
Yeah.
transparent.
Yeah. It feels like one needs like a simulator of given product X that's moving from country A to country B. What will customs on either side ask you, and are you prepared for it? Right? It's like
And it changes like overnight.
yeah, yeah. It's so dynamic. Yeah,
That would be a
you have
really
to.
good, I think that someone should take up a software product project, right? And like build that out to where all of these things that like float in the heads of a customs broker, that it could say, okay, what are you doing? And it would like walk that importer and or exporter through the process so they understand, like they wouldn't have to know how to file the customs or anything like that, but they would have to know like sort of an algorithmic sort of product that says, okay, you're exporting what? What's it made of? Like, does it have steel or aluminum? Like, is it an extrusion? Does it have anti-dumping? Like all these things that, affect us. That way they're aware, because then you get a buyer beware in that. And so both the importer and the exporter could use that. I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, yeah, something to explore. And there's obviously the knowledge of what is required, but then there's these execution steps of, okay, we need to file this paperwork, we need to submit these forms.
Mhm.
For that same example, maybe just for familiarity, where we were transporting jackfruit or some type of perishable, you said FDA as a partner, a government agency that you need to deal with, perhaps a couple more. But just overall, how many forms would you have to fill on the import side in order to clear it? And are there
Mhm.
like any other things that you need to request from the exporter so that you can look it up? Can you explain a bit about the actual paperwork that's involved?
Sure, sure. Well, I mean, we have the entry, of course. So that's the 3461, which allows for immediate delivery, and the 7501, which tells you how much duties you're going to have to pay on it, right? So those are the basics. There's also the importer security filing, which has to be done prior to an ocean shipment leaving the country of origin. So those are your very basic forms. Those are ones that every broker has to do for importing goods if they're on ocean. If they're air, an importer security filing is not required for the air shipment, at least not for customs. There's other forms that are required by the actual air handlers that I'm not even going to get into because I don't know them. If you're importing, it depends on what you're importing. If you're importing agricultural products, your base is going to be USDA and FDA. FDA for food, assuming it's food product, and your USDA for natural products, right? So you have a natural product that would be like a fruit or a vegetable or something like that. So you'd have that. Now, if it's certified organic, you're also going to have that form. So you have to provide a document showing that the goods are organic, that you have the right documentation, that it is from an organic farm, that these specific goods are farmed organically, right? So then you have that. If it's a wood product, now you get into Lacey Act. So now
Yeah.
you have to file that form as well if it's a wood product by providing like the actual wood genus and species, as well as the like if it's wood flooring, for example, you obviously wouldn't need FDA or even USDA. You would just need the Lacey Act, and you would ask you about like the square meters that are being covered by the flooring itself. So so you have Lacey Act products. Then you have right now what launched today was CPSC, the Product Safety Commission, has now launched a form that we have to fill out for certain goods. There's about 600 HTS codes that are listed, and there could be more later. They're still reviewing. But you're thinking like your infant products, your children's products, anything that could be potentially harmful in some way. And like a client of mine is a t-shirt importer, so we have to file it for their youth t-shirts, their baby t-shirts, and their baby onesies, right? So now we have to do that. You also have to go on and get registered with the SPC or CPSC specifically to show that you are going to be importing these kinds of goods. So I guess they know to look out for it. even if it doesn't affect all of your shipments. So there's that. There's another client I have who imports goods that fall under the same HTS code as some of the CPSC products, but they're not meant for infants, which is how this falls in because it's similar to an infant product, but it is absolutely not an infant product. It is not marketed to use with infants. So those would be disclaimed, right? Because they're not being used in the way that it is required for this claim. So there's that. There's if you're importing tobacco, there's TTB that has to be filed. If you're importing alcohol, there's I think TTB still, because I don't import alcohol because that is a different animal, and somebody would have to train me on that one. Pharmaceuticals have their own forms that they have to fill out. That's, and then you got anti-dumping, which requires increased bonds, collateral. It gets complicated.
Yeah.
Just with
Yeah.
your jackfruit idea, I mean, that one right there, assuming it's organic, at least 3.
Got it. Got it. And are these paper forms? Are these digital? Like,
It's all digital.
what?
Everything is done online now. So I have an ABI, an automated broker interface. I fill out all the required data points that are needed for the entry. And then, excuse me, if the entry also requires partner government agencies, I fill those out in there as well.
Okay, got it. So this is a special login that you get as an LCB. Not anyone can get it, I suppose, right?
Right. You had to work for a brokerage to have access to an ABI. You also have to be, as I understand it, you had to be a broker to even be able to sell a bond, right? So because we have bonds that have to be sold as well for the financial responsibility required by the CFR, companies who are importing have to have a bond in place to cover the amount of goods being imported, plus their duties if it's single entry, or 10% of the duties if it's a continuous bond. So again, that's another complication in how all of this works.
Yeah, yeah. And do you have to fill these forms for each and every shipment?
For the bonds, no, unless it's single entry. So the continuous bond is good. It's supposed to be good for a year or until it's exhausted. With the way that the bond saturation calculation is being used, they're exhausted very often these days because it's really hard to predict when certain tariffs are no longer in place. We don't know what tariffs are going to be in place. It's making it very hard for us to figure out the right size of continuous bond. So it's been murder. Then you have single entry bonds. Single entry bonds have a different calculation all their own. So they have where you are importing a product. Let's say you're importing $50,000 worth of goods, right? In the single entry bond, you have to cover not just the value of the goods. You also have to add in the product duty rate as well. So if it's $50,000 and the only thing that applies is Section 122 right now, that's going to be $55,000 you have to cover. But if there's also FDA, now you have to triple how much you're covering. So your single entry bond went from having to cover $55,000 to $165,000. So that bond just got very expensive. And so now you have to say, okay, well, is that what we're going to do? Or does it make more sense financially to set the client up with a continuous bond? Because then they only have to cover 10% of the annual duties, which, if the annual duties are $500,000, you're only covering $50,000. That's the minimum bond anyway, right? So sometimes, even though a single entry bond can be the better option, sometimes a continuous bond, even for only one shipment, is a better financial option.
Got it. Got it. So you may, so for every shipment, you don't have to fill out all of those forms if you are in a continuous bond, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So once a continuous bond is in place, you're good for a year or until the bond is saturated.
Okay. So you as an importer can keep bringing this jackfruit in for up to a year. And the system just recognizes everything is in place and you keep using it. Okay, got it.
Yeah, we put all the information on the back end of the system to say that everything is good. And it also confirms within the ACE system.
Okay, understood. I also wanted to check, in case you had to do this repeatedly, like how much time does it take to fill this out for one shipment, assuming there are 3 or 4 forms?
For an ag shipment, it depends on how many you've done of that particular product, right? So if you've done one or you've done none, and now this is your first one, that can take quite a while. because you're researching, you're making sure that you're following all the protocols, that you're filling out every single right form in the right way. Then you got to look, if you get errors when you go to file it, then you have to look at the PGA error dictionary to see what else needs to be input that you missed. You can look at the PGA error dictionary first and try to, ascertain from there, but it's not always helpful. And then you would build a template. My system allows me to build a template. So if I know that this particular client is going to import the exact same product, the exact same way every single time, then I build a template, and then the subsequent entries can take a lot less time. And so we can say, okay, well, we know that it's, $50,000 worth of this fruit that is, we've got all the templates built and everything. Now, instead of taking an hour or two, it may only take, 15 minutes. And then we process it through. Now, we also have to make sure to select that it's perishable. And this tells customs that it needs to be, if it's going to be reviewed, it needs to be reviewed quickly, as well as the PGAs. So that way they have idea that, okay, this can't just sit in the warehouse for, weeks on
Yeah.
end going
Yeah.
bad. We have to make sure that we're following up on the perishable stuff first.
It's like a little priority baggage sticker on the ship.
Sort of. Yeah. But it better be perishable, because if it's not and you select that, you're going to get in
Yeah.
trouble.
Got it. No, this is amazing. Just fascinating how all of this works. Would love to also understand your take, Kim, on how you see AI helping, if it has so far. What do you see as some of the risks of AI in trade in general, as an LCD, as an importer, or someone who helps importers? What's your general take on the technological changes that are happening?
Sure. I mean, AI can be a really great tool, but it should be used as a tool. It is not an end all be all. Please do not use ChatGPT to code your stuff. Like, don't ask ChatGPT what the code is for something, because it could be very, very, very incorrect. And yeah, you're bringing in something that, like, for example, yesterday I was looking up nitrile gloves, and it could fall into chapter 39 or chapter 40. So I got to find out more information. Okay, if it's chapter 30 and it's just a basic plastic type of material, fine, then we use this code. But if it's, a vulcanized rubber, then I'm like, okay, I don't know. I don't deal with nitrile gloves. Is it vulcanized rubber? I don't know. I know rubber gloves are, so but nitrile gloves are nitrile. They're not rubber, right? Because people use nitrile gloves because of allergens to rubber. So, then you have to go back to the client, who has to go to the exporter. We need a materials list on how this is made. What is this made with? And then we have to go and look and say, okay, this falls under 30 or 40 based on that. Now, if it's 40, it could have additional duties for it, because I believe that one has Section 301. So if it's coming out of China, you might have additional duties. If it's nitrile gloves for industrial use coming out of China and they are under Chapter 40, you might have 100% duty on, which, will make a lot of nail techs very upset, or anybody else who uses gloves in an industrial setting, or I think even laboratories. Medical and surgical, they have a 25% tariffs on them if they're under Chapter 40. They're under Chapter 39, because there's no rubber in them, then they don't have a tariff at all, except for the Section 1. So yes, this all lives in my head, but it's fresh. I just looked it up yesterday.
Yeah. So I mean, lesson learned over there is, do not use ChatGPT for looking up, say, classification codes,
Yeah,
because there's
because
so much
you might
nuance.
get one answer, and then the broker's going to look it up with broker knowledge, and they're going to say,
Yeah.
no, that's not right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's really easy to do.
Right.
It's really easy to get them backwards, like 84 and 85. Like, those fall under the same section, but they could, you could end up with, are you in the nuclear reactors chapter, or are you
Mm.
in the parts of nuclear reactors chapter? Like, and that's where it comes down to using an LLM for that kind of research. It's a start, but it's not something you should depend on, right?
Yeah.
I
Absolutely.
do use AI as a tool for some of the products that we're trying to ascertain exactly what our client is telling us, right? Or, hey, I can throw in a website with a product on it, and I can say, what is this? And please give me a good description. I'll do that I did it actually a couple weeks ago. I put in a website because I was trying to code something, and I put it in ChatGPT first. I said, give me a technical spec for this, because there was no technical spec on the website itself. Right. So I was like, I know it comes from here. I know it's made with this, but I don't know how to describe it. Please describe it for me. So ChatGPT did give me a description. I used that description in my AI tool to then provide me with a good HTS code. Then I verified that HTS code in the actual HTS code hosted by the government. And
Yeah.
I went through and I looked and I went, okay, I think that matches. Then I sent that to my client and say, does this match this? And then my client signs off on that. So
Yeah.
it's not as easy as just ask Gemini or ask Chat or ask Claude or anything. It really is not that easy because you may not get the right answer. And so your expectations are going to be upsetting because you thought it was a free duty item and it turns out it's got 100% duty on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Not a good surprise to have. So there's definitely one aspect. And this is not necessarily about AI, but just software or technology in general, given that
Mhm,
you work with so many clients and they have a variety of shipments and the volumes are different. Have you been asked by clients to analyze their shipments, analyze like how much duty they've paid over the years? Do
mhm,
you have to do those types of exercises to figure out refunds or other things like now there's a CAPE system which is different for refunds. All seems very complicated and it's all very date bound, right?
mhm.
So how are you using any tools that are available in order to do that type of work in a more efficient way?
Yeah, so I actually just go into ACE. So this is a free website provided by the government. It's so funny. I was telling somebody that a couple of years ago I was rarely in ACE. I would have to call them and say, "Hey, can you can you reactivate my account because I don't do a lot of exports." So I wasn't really needing to follow up on things and things weren't so complicated then. Now they're very, very, very complicated. And so I'm in ACE every day. And so I never have to call them for reaccess again. But there's a reporting function. So getting your ACE set up was very difficult at the beginning of CAPE. I think a lot of people were experiencing a lot of lag, a lot of problems, couldn't get their ACE account set up. We solved it for several of our clients who were able to, or who were unable to get their accounts. And so we got that set up by, knowing the right people and making the right phone calls and saying, hey, we've got this problem. Can you help with this? And it doesn't take them very long to do it. But, when it comes to actually, if you don't know someone, that's why I say work with a professional, work with a broker, because they're going to know. And then when you have the issues of the actual reports, it's not intuitive. The ACE system is not an intuitive system that you can just go into and think you're going to know everything. It's not that well done. You want to have somebody guide you through it on how to use it first. And as long as you can retain that information, and I mean, the government is really good about, like, customs is really good about providing tutorials and providing ways that you can go through and actually get this information. So once you learn how to run your reports, it's not hard. You just have to learn how to do it first. So you go in, you run your reports, and you see what you're looking at, and they all can be downloaded in Excel. And that's very, very helpful. So, so then what I do is I go through the Excel report and then I filter as necessary based on the HTS code, based on the date. And then from that, I can derive exactly how much my clients have paid. For CAPE, it was which entries, every single entry that was affected by a dutiable IEEPA code. So I was able to go through that and get one of my clients like millions of dollars back. So that was very helpful for them. Another one of my clients, more millions of dollars back. So, and then my smaller clients who are getting hundreds of thousands of dollars back. So, they're one who was over the moon for the $12,000 they got back because a small business, their volumes, like $12,000 is a month of runway, right? So that's something that really they're very happy with, and they got their money back. I don't charge a large fee for doing that. I don't even charge contingency.
Mm.
And so getting them set up, getting them in place, and then, you know, and then they got it a few weeks later. So, that was very satisfying. But the big thing is really, and I walk people through how to do it, especially my new drawback clients. So I have several people who are looking at drawback now as a way to try to, recover some of the loss of imports that are later exported. And so I'm walking them through how to run their reports. And then they know how to filter. Like, I'm like, you want to filter based on this. Here's what you don't want to look at. If you have anything that's section 232, it is not allowed for drawback. So that being said, you want to make sure that you're filtering out any 232 codes. And if you need those codes, you can look at your entries, or you can just call me and I'll email you what those codes are. So I try to give the power to the importer themselves, because by law, they're ultimately responsible for it. So because they're responsible for every bit of the import process, if I do something wrong, the importer is still responsible for it, right? So
Yes.
brokers should have
Mm.
E&O insurance in order to protect themselves from an importer who may try to sue them because something happened and the importer was held responsible for it. But that's where I say, okay, here's where you can access your report. Here's how to run your report. Let's walk through it together. And then I try to go where I show them and then they show me what they learned if we have time. We don't always have time for that. But if they have any questions or they come back and they're like, hey, I forgot how to do this. This is a couple weeks ago. Can we do it again? That's perfectly fine. I walk them through it again. And it really
Yeah.
is just
Yeah.
making sure that they know that the one thing that they cannot do is actually file the drawback themselves, and should not do, because it's rough with, I mean, there's so much compliance, and you
Yeah.
don't want to go through all the legwork of making sure your inventory management is on point and everything is good just to get denied the money that you thought you were working towards, right? So I
Yeah.
say use a professional every time.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Great tip. And Kim, one other question that I always ask my guests is there a trade story that you would tell your grandkids which would make them go, oh wow, that's pretty cool?
Well, if they're kids still, I would probably tell them the story about importing a dinosaur. So it was an animatronic dinosaur years and years ago for a client of mine, and it was huge. So that was fun because we did the freight and we did this was back when I had freight internal. And so we did the freight and we did the customs. Turns out it's under Chapter 95, if you're ever wondering. But it was for trade show, so that was really fun. I've imported baskets of puppies before APHIS got really complicated about baskets of puppies.
Yeah.
And I think there's horror stories as well when it comes to trade that you want to, I don't tell kids. It's more like telling, students, right? So you want to tell students, you want to be transparent with the kinds of headaches that they could encounter.
Mm.
And one was a client who refused to declare and assist on their paperwork. And, I'm like, well, you have to. That's the law. And the response to me after days of back and forth was, we appreciate your adherence to compliance, but you're not aligned with our strategic direction. And we're going to revoke your power of attorney. And that was, I mean, it was heartbreaking because I had worked, and of course, I sent them my invoice, they paid me, but then by law I had to report them. And you don't want to report a business. You don't
Yes.
ever want to report anybody for doing something wrong, because as a small business owner myself, I understand. I get it. Especially when the tariffs go into place overnight and you knew nothing about it and your goods are on the water and now you have to pay 102% and you were expecting 50%. So I understand, but the law is the law, and I'm not losing my license or going to jail for anybody, as I don't think any broker would. So it's okay, let's look at what if they're just unwilling to do, they're looking to commit fraud, which is what that is. When you do not declare the full value of your goods, including the assist, then that's fraud. You're defrauding the government. And so unfortunately, it had to be, I don't know where it went since then. I haven't seen anything in the news. But I know that, they may be under scrutiny specifically for that because, or they might get what's called a CF-28. So the government they love their forms. So they'll send you a CF-28, which is a form saying, hey, about that import that you did 3 years ago. And yes, they will wait. They have a 5-year statute of limitations.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need more information on that. We
Mm.
need to know what these were made of. We need to understand the assists. We need all this information. And that's when I say get an attorney, a trade attorney, specifically a trade attorney who's very good with CF-28s. Because then it goes into what's called a CF-29. And if you don't respond appropriately, the CF-29 is then, hey, you're going to get fined for this. You're going to get a penalty. And this is why. And so you just end up saying, okay, sometimes the penalties are really small. It was something, based on timing. Sometimes those penalties are not only the duties you were supposed to pay, but as well as excess penalties. If you don't, and if it's egregious and it continues to go on even after you've been told and warned and you've paid penalties, yeah, you could actually go to jail. So this isn't something that is a game. This is something that is very, very real, and that is the horror story that I want people to understand before they get into this job.
Yeah.
I read earlier, a friend of mine on LinkedIn said his wife calls him a hall monitor being in trade compliance, and I'm like, yeah, basically, if you look at the mafia way of defining hall monitor, that's what we are for trade.
Yeah, yeah. No, it is. It is. It is serious business, and a lot of responsibility lies on your shoulders. Kim, this has been amazing. So very educational, and thanks for diving deep and giving out so many useful tips, which I'm sure will be extremely helpful, not just to the trade professionals listening, but also companies, importers, exporters, who
Mhm.
don't necessarily know the details, but they just put in a request and their broker does it for them. So I'm sure this will help them understand a lot of what you guys do. And thanks also for running global trade and your contributions over the years. I think a lot of us, including me, who are new to this space, don't realize how complicated and how difficult it is to move things from A to B. But we just don't think about it when we get a new phone, which is manufactured somewhere else and just coming to our country, right? So
Yeah,
I really want
there's
to
a lot
thank
of stuff
you.
people fail to think about when it comes, and I did too. I mean, I moved around the world 3 times. I didn't know what customs broker was until I started studying to be one.
Yeah, yeah. No, but thank you. Thank you for everything that you do. And thanks for being on this podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it, Shailesh.
Amazing.